My name is Eliza Montgomery. And before we go any further, I want you to understand one thing. I didn't want the house. I wanted what it meant. It wasn't the sprawling porches or the antique chandeliers. It wasn't the oak-paneled library or the $3 million valuation. It was the memories. The quiet dignity of my grandfather reading in his favorite armchair. The smell of cedarwood and pipe tobacco that still lingered in the hallway. The garden he tended with hands older than most of my memories. The way he said my name like it was a promise. That house held my childhood, my sanctuary, my story, and they erased me from it in a single afternoon. I suppose betrayal always arrives dressed for a celebration. It came wrapped in navy blue suits and designer grief, with forged smiles and crystal glasses clinking at a long mahogany table. It came 3 weeks after grandfather's funeral delayed, because the lawyers needed time to prepare the estate reading. But they didn't need time. They needed silence. Mine. They got the first part of what they wanted. I stayed silent that day for too long. Let me rewind. My grandfather, Gerald Montgomery, was a self-made man, the type they write books about. Rough childhood military discipline, a real estate empire by the time he turned 40. But to me, he was just Grandpa G, the only member of the family who saw me beyond my resume. While my cousins competed for Ivy League placements and hedge fund internships, I was soldering circuits and building speakers out of vintage parts. I became an audio engineer because sound was the only place no one talked over me. Grandpa loved it, said I had an ear for truth. And truth was what he valued more than anything, even family. Especially family. His children, my uncles and aunts, were vultures in pearls and cufflinks. They circled before he even fell ill. They took over his calendar. They isolated him with professional caretakers. And when he grew too weak to argue, they began planning the legacy they assumed was theirs by blood and default. Except, they forgot one thing. He never forgot me. While they were busy restructuring his holdings, I was at his side, reading to him when his eyesight dimmed, playing recordings from our favorite symphonies, recording stories from his youth. Not for anyone, just for him. Just so he'd know someone still listened. In the final month, he asked me to bring my old cassette recorder. Not the digital one. He said, his voice a rasp of wind. The real one, with the little red light. I didn't ask why. I just nodded. And I pressed record. He spoke for less than 2 minutes, but it changed everything. I didn't realize how much, not until the reading of the will. They booked the room at McAllister and Graves, a law firm older than the Declaration. The marble lobby echoed with rehearsed condolences. My name wasn't listed on the printed agenda. Just Gerald's heirs and primary stakeholders. Stakeholders. As if he were a business, not a man. When the will was read, my name wasn't in it. Not once. Not for the house. Not for the cars. Not even for the vintage radio collection I helped him restore. They divvied everything up with smooth precision. Aunt Caroline got the Aspen cabin. Uncle Dean took the Manhattan condo. Cousin Victor, who never visited Grandpa once in the hospital, got the entire wine cellar. And the mansion, our home, went to Benjamin, the oldest son, as firstborn rights. As if we were royalty and this was Game of Thrones. They didn't look at me as they signed the transfer papers. They didn't have to. They thought I'd disappear. But I had the recording. And I had a plan. I didn't confront them. Not yet. I let them think they'd won. I let them host that little family toast inside the mansion 2 weeks later. The one where they invited friends posed in the courtyard and called themselves the new era of Montgomerys. They thought I was gone. But silence is never the same as surrender. And sound? Sound has a way of surviving even when the ink is dry, even when the signatures lie. So before we dive deeper into how they tried to bury me with the will, and how I buried them with his voice, subscribe to the channel if you want the whole truth. Because this story, it's just beginning. The day they read the will was sunny, cruelly sunny. The kind of weather you'd expect for a garden party, not a reckoning. The sky stretched blue and smug over the white stone facade of McAllister and Graves, like even the weather had been invited into the deception. I walked in alone wearing my grandfather's cufflinks, small, circular, and made from the wood of the original study desk in the mansion. He gave them to me when I turned 21. said they belonged to the next generation of the house. I didn't understand the weight of those words then. I do now. The lobby smelled of expensive cologne and fresh orchids. A uniformed receptionist smiled as she confirmed my name, then paused. "You're not on the guest list," she said. Politely, efficiently. I smiled back. "That's okay." My invitation was spoken, not written. She frowned slightly, uncertain what to do with defiance disguised as civility. But before she could object, the elevator dinged and Benjamin Montgomery, my uncle, stepped out flanked by two of his lawyers. "Eliza," he said with a practiced smirk. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Funny," I replied. "That's what most people say before something unexpected happens." He raised an eyebrow. "Still a poet. Still a fraud." We didn't shake hands. Inside the conference room, it was all glass and gravitas. Everyone wore tailored black. Not morning black performance. Black. The kind worn by people who never actually grieve, just execute. A long mahogany table sat in the center where our family once gathered for Thanksgiving. Now it held thick legal folders and monogrammed notepads. Bottled water imported. Pens engraved. All that was missing was the truth. When the estate attorney, Mr. Levingston, entered, everyone sat straighter except me. I leaned back, arms crossed, camera bag at my feet. "We are gathered," he began to execute the last will and testament of Gerald Montgomery, dated February 18th of last year. The room stilled. That date was wrong. I knew the most recent draft, the one Grandpa discussed with me, was from April. 2 months later. 2 months wiser. Benjamin shot me a glance a flicker too quick to be casual. And then Levingston began reading. The language was cold, surgical. Everything was divided with ruthless symmetry. Stocks, bonds, property. The Montana ranch, the Manhattan condo, the Aspen chalet, all parceled out like slices of meat at a royal feast. And the mansion? To Benjamin Montgomery as firstborn son and trustee of the family estate. I watched the faces around the table. Some were smug, others expectant. But none were surprised. They already knew. They'd seen this version of the will before today, because they helped create it. I let the reading finish without interruption. No gasps, no protests. Just silence, my oldest weapon. Then I stood. Mr. Levingston looked up, startled. "Miss Montgomery." "I'd like to submit evidence," I said calmly, reaching into my bag. Benjamin barked a laugh. "This isn't a court, Eliza. Then you won't mind if the truth takes the floor." I placed an old cassette player, the kind with real buttons and worn edges, in the center of the table. The room tensed. One of the lawyers leaned forward. "What is this?" "A memory," I said. "One they hoped you'd never hear." I pressed play, and my grandfather's voice, gravelly, slow, unmistakable, filled the room. "This is Gerald Montgomery, April 14th. If anything happens to me, I want this clear. The house on Briar Hill Lane belongs to Eliza, no one else. She's the only one who ever understood what home means. She's the one who sat with me, listened, cared. Let the lawyers know if they try to bury this. They're burying me twice." The room froze. Even Benjamin's smug mask cracked. Grandpa's voice continued, slow fading, but the words were clear. "She has the key. And my blessing. Don't let bloodlines erase love." When the tape ended, the silence was deafening. Mr. Levingston cleared his throat. "This recording is recent." "April," I confirmed. "Same year. And it matches his handwriting from a revised draft I found in his study." But that draft disappeared. "Convenient," Benjamin muttered. "Not convenient," I replied. "Predictable." I turned to the lawyer. "I believe you'll need to authenticate this, of course. I have the original cassette time-stamped and an affidavit from the caretaker who witnessed the recording." Gasps fluttered like birds. "And I'll be happy to cooperate with probate court. But in the meantime," I said, gathering my bag, "you may want to postpone handing over the deed." Then I left. I didn't wait for protests. I didn't turn back to see who followed. Because I knew one thing for sure. The lie had been read. But the truth was just getting warmed up. I returned to the mansion the next morning, not as a guest, not as a granddaughter, but as a rightful heir walking into the battlefield that used to be home. The house on Briar Hill Lane sat perched like a forgotten heirloom, grand, yet exhausted from generations of quiet wars. Ivy curled possessively around the stone columns. The front lawn had been freshly cut, no doubt for the benefit of Benjamin's ego, not the guests. A Montgomery family crest still hung on the gate, its gold sheen dulled by decades of lies. As I pulled into the circular driveway, I noticed something new. A security camera on the west corner of the house, and another by the front door. They'd installed them after Grandpa died to protect what wasn't theirs. I rang the doorbell. Once, twice. No answer. I wasn't surprised. I walked around the side garden past the rose bushes Grandpa had once taught me to prune. Dead branches steal energy, he used to say. Cut them early. I stopped at the kitchen door, reached into my coat pocket, and pulled out an old brass key. It slid in easily. The house still remembered me, even if its inhabitants pretended not to. Inside, the air was unnaturally clean, scrubbed, polished, stripped of memory. The smell of citrus cleaner overpowered the usual earthy scent of leather and old wood. Benjamin's wife, no doubt. She always hated the smell of old things. A fitting metaphor for her view of our history. I stood in the foyer listening. Silence. Then footsteps, fast, heavy, deliberate. Benjamin appeared at the top of the staircase, a robe thrown over his pinstriped pajamas. "Eliza," he growled. "What the hell are you doing here?" Using my key, I said evenly. "The same one Grandpa gave me when I turned 25. Remember that day? You told him I'd probably sell it for art supplies. This house belongs to the estate." "No," I said, stepping forward. "It belongs to me, and we both know it. You can't just walk in here. Actually, I can. Legally, no court has awarded the property yet, which means possession remains neutral, and I'm asserting mine." Benjamin's mouth twitched. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone who knew the rules better than he did. "You always were dramatic," he spat. "No," I said. "You always assumed I was too quiet to fight back." I turned away from him, heading toward the study. The door was locked. Of course. I reached back into my bag and pulled out a tiny envelope. Inside was a second key, smaller, older, engraved with the letter G. The door clicked open. The room smelled like dust and cedar untouched. His leather chair was still pushed slightly back from the desk, as if he'd just stood up for tea. Books still lay open on the side table. A half-burnt candle remained beside a framed photo of Grandpa and me fishing 10 years ago. We were both laughing, hair, windswept, sunburnt, and alive. I touched the frame. "Are you really going to play this out, Eliza?" Benjamin asked behind me, trying to sound exasperated. "I'm not playing anything," I said. "I'm restoring something." I knelt beside the bookshelf and ran my hand under the third shelf, the one Grandpa had hollowed out after his health started declining. There, taped carefully, was what I hoped would still be there. A flash drive. I pocketed it. "Still scavenging for proof?" Benjamin asked, crossing his arms. "I'm retrieving what's mine." He exhaled sharply. "Look, I know we've had differences, but you don't want to drag the family through this." "That's exactly what you're hoping I'll say. That I'll back down in the name of unity." "But you don't want unity. You want silence." He stepped forward, voice lowering. "You think this house will make you happy? It's a tomb. Grandpa built this legacy on power, on control. You think he really meant to give it to you? You think he wasn't just humoring the sentimental granddaughter with a camera?" I turned, meeting his eyes. He wasn't perfect, but he saw me. And unlike you, he knew the value of presence over pretense. Benjamin's face hardened. "Fine. If you want to go to court, we will. But don't expect the rest of the family to side with you. They've all signed affidavits. They've all seen our version of the will." "That's okay," I said, "because now they'll see mine." He scoffed. "A tape. A photograph of a handwritten note. You think sentimentality wins lawsuits?" "No," I said, holding up the flash drive. "But audio files, metadata, and security footage from before you changed the locks might." His eyes widened just slightly. Then I turned and left. As I stepped back into the sunlight, a gust of wind blew through the sycamores, scattering dry leaves across the driveway. The mansion loomed behind me, ancient and unsure. It no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like something cracking open. And I hadn't even started speaking yet. The law doesn't care if you were your grandfather's favorite. It doesn't care about childhood memories, fishing trips, or handwritten birthday cards tucked into old books. The law wants proof, documented, time-stamped, admissible. So I gave it exactly that. By Monday morning, I was standing outside the law firm of Patterson and Lyle, a steel and glass monolith in the heart of downtown. My boots echoed on the marble as I stepped through the revolving door. In my hand, the flash drive. In my chest, years of words I had swallowed to keep the family peace. A young assistant in a blazer 2 sizes too big led me into a conference room with glass walls and chairs too comfortable to feel fair. I waited only 5 minutes before the door opened, and in walked Meredith Kane, the estate attorney assigned to my grandfather's case. She was sharp-eyed mid-40s with the kind of calm that came from seeing families destroy themselves over property more times than she could count. "Miss Morgan," she said, extending a hand. "I was told you had something to present." "I do," I replied, handing her the flash drive. She inserted it into her laptop, raised an eyebrow as the file opened. She clicked play. At first only silence. Then the unmistakable sound of my grandfather clearing his throat. "If you're listening to this," he began, his voice raspy but firm, "it means something went wrong." Meredith leaned forward slightly. "My name is George Montgomery. I am of sound mind and spirit. This recording is dated March 14th, 2 weeks before I signed my official will with Meredith Kane present, and I'm making it because I no longer trust all my children." I watched her blink. She hadn't known about this recording. "Benjamin has been pressuring me to change certain clauses. I suspect, no, I know. He intends to challenge anything that doesn't leave him the house. But that house? It belongs to Eliza." He paused. She stayed. When I couldn't remember my own name, she brought me soup and photographs and stories. She didn't ask for anything, so I'm leaving her the mansion. Not out of guilt, not out of charity, out of respect. The audio ended. Silence. Then Meredith exhaled, sat back in her chair, and said the words I had been waiting to hear. "Well, damn." I didn't smile. Not yet. Instead, I placed one more envelope on the table. "These," I said, "are 3 notarized statements from neighbors who saw me entering and exiting the house regularly for the last 3 years, up until the day my grandfather passed." Meredith opened the envelope, scanned the documents. "You've built a strong claim," she said slowly, "especially considering the timing of the original will's revisions. It'll take some heavy legal lifting, but this changes the game." "Good," I said. "Do you want to pursue this in probate court?" "I want to expose what they did," I replied. "I want it on record, not just for me, but because they've done this before. To others, to our cousins." My grandfather wasn't the first. Meredith nodded. "This may get ugly." I looked her in the eye. "It already is." That afternoon, I returned to the house now with legal representation. Benjamin opened the door, smugness cracking like a mask. "Back again," he sneered. Meredith stepped forward. "You'll be receiving official notice by end of day. Until then, we ask that no items be removed from the home, including heirlooms, documents, or assets tied to the estate." "You've got to be kidding." "I'm not," she cut in. "And if anything goes missing, we'll seek immediate injunction. We've already secured footage from the security company. All backups from the last 30 days are archived." Benjamin's face turned pale. I said nothing, just looked around the house one last time. This place had once meant warmth and belonging. But standing there amid marble floors and gilded frames, I realized something chilling. Family isn't what shares your blood. It's what fights for your name when you're not in the room. And Benjamin had done the opposite. As we left, I saw my Aunt Gloria standing at the edge of the driveway. She'd always kept to herself, but now she looked at me with something unreadable in her eyes. "You know," she said quietly, "he never stopped talking about you." I paused. "Grandpa," she nodded. "The day he died, he kept saying, 'Eliza will know what to do.'" I swallowed hard, and for the first time in a long time, I believed it. The front door of the mansion closed behind us with a soft but final thud. The kind of sound that once heard you don't forget a door, not just closing, but drawing a line between what was and what's about to be undone. For years, my grandfather built that house as a symbol of unity, of strength, of family. He commissioned every brick, every banister, every glass panel with intention. But somewhere between the polished mahogany and chandelier reflections, that house had become a shrine to a lie, one carefully maintained by the very people who now sought to steal it. Benjamin, Gloria, and my cousin Theo weren't just fighting for property. They were fighting to maintain a version of our family where I, Eliza Montgomery, was always just outside the frame, an afterthought, an extra in their script. But Grandpa knew better. He chose me, and they couldn't stomach that. That night, I sat alone in my small apartment listening again to his final recording, not because I doubted its power, but because I wanted to hear his voice. To remember what real love sounds like when the world is all noise. My family may not understand this, he'd said in that soft, deliberate tone. But Eliza does. She understands loyalty without reward. Those words haunted me not because they made me sad, but because they reminded me of the years I gave without keeping score. I was there when Benjamin forgot his birthday, when Gloria flew off to Paris while Grandpa recovered from a stroke, when Theo, newly married, visited only long enough to ask about inheritance. I didn't carry flowers to impress him. I carried groceries, medication. I held his hand during memory lapses and waited in silent agony as he searched for my name in the fog of dementia. And when he remembered, when he really remembered, he would say it softly. Eliza, my girl who stayed. The next morning I got a call. Meredith had filed a petition for an emergency probate hearing. It wasn't common, but given the circumstances, a disputed will, concealed documents, and credible evidence of fraud, it had been granted. The court date was set. 2 weeks. I could feel it, the unraveling. And they could too. By evening, I received the first of many calls. First, it was Theo pretending concern. I mean, Eliza, is this really what Grandpa would have wanted? Us fighting over a house. I didn't answer. I let the silence speak. Then came Gloria, this time softer. Eliza, sweetheart, I think we all just misunderstood the paperwork. Maybe we can find a way to share. Funny how quickly you were never part of this turned into, let's split it. But it was Benjamin's message that sealed it. He didn't call. He texted, you think one recording makes you worthy? You were always second tier. Let's see how the court sees it. That message, I screenshotted it. I forwarded it to Meredith. Evidence isn't always in documents. Sometimes it's in the tone behind the words. I spent the days before the hearing not just preparing legally but emotionally. I pulled out the dusty albums I'd made over the years, ones they never bothered to look at. In one, there was a photo of Grandpa planting rosemary in the backyard. I was 14, dirt under my fingernails, laughing beside him. That same rosemary bush still grew behind the mansion, but I knew they'd never water it. They wouldn't even recognize its scent, because they weren't fighting for memory. They were fighting for marble countertops, rental income, and a slice of prestige. What they failed to see was that Grandpa's legacy was never in the title deed. It was in the quiet rituals, in the unspoken trust he passed to the one person who didn't ask for anything in return. 3 days before court, I visited his grave. No flowers, just truth. I'm ready, I whispered, touching the stone. Not just to win, but to speak, to say everything I never could when you were too tired to hear it. And maybe he heard me. Courtrooms are rarely as dramatic as movies. No pounding gavels, no gasps from the gallery. Just fluorescent lights, thick folders, and lawyers who speak like chess players. But that morning, as I walked into the probate hearing flanked by Meredith, I felt something cinematic in the air. Maybe it was the way Gloria looked anywhere but at me. Maybe it was the way Theo kept adjusting his tie. Or maybe it was the growing awareness in Benjamin's eyes that the storm was no longer something he could control. Don't react. Just watch, Meredith had told me on the drive over. They think this will be about documents, but we're bringing ghosts. The judge, a woman in her 60s with a demeanor like polished steel, began the session by reviewing the original petition. Gloria's claim that the most recent version of the will had gone missing, and the only existing copy named her Benjamin and Theo as beneficiaries. Meredith stood. With the court's permission, we'd like to introduce new evidence and new voices. And so began the unraveling. The first to testify wasn't me. It was Linda Green, Grandpa's hospice nurse for the last 9 months of his life. She took the stand with a calm that made the courtroom hold its breath. I was with Mr. Montgomery almost daily, she said. He often spoke about his granddaughter Eliza. He expressed regret that his children only came around when they needed something. He referred to Eliza as The one who saw me as a person, not a bank. Oh, and there were some uncomfortable coughs from the defense table. Did Mr. Montgomery ever mention his will? Linda nodded. Yes. He said he made a change, that he wanted Eliza to have the house, said it was hers in every way that mattered. Meredith turned toward the judge. And to your knowledge, did any of his other children hear him say this? Not once, Linda replied. They were rarely there, but Linda wasn't the only one. Next was Marcus Bell, Grandpa's longtime gardener. He spoke in a quiet, slow rhythm, but his words struck hard. I remember he told me one afternoon, Marcus, this house is going to be Eliza's one day. I put it in writing. Said it with pride, like he'd finally done something right. Then came the real moment of silence when Meredith brought out the audio file. Your Honor, with permission, we'd like to play a recording made 3 weeks before Mr. Montgomery's passing. The voice you'll hear is verified by timestamp and has been forensically authenticated. The judge gave a small nod. The room dimmed slightly as the audio played. Grandpa's voice filled the space, aged and worn, but unmistakably sincere. I don't know if they'll like it, but it's mine to give. I want Eliza to have the house. She earned it. Not by blood, by love. And that matters more to me than signatures. Benjamin shot up from his seat. Objection. This recording could be fabricated. The judge held up a hand, silencing him without a word. The room was still. I glanced across the aisle. Gloria's hands were clenched in her lap. Theo looked like he wanted to disappear. Benjamin, red-faced, whispered furiously to his attorney, but nothing they could say would unring that bell. The judge looked down at the file before her. We will take a recess before hearing final arguments. In the hallway, Meredith turned to me. They underestimated memory. They built their whole case on paper, forgetting that the heart leaves witnesses. She was right. Because legacy isn't just notarized documents and family trees. It's the echo of trust, the imprint of loyalty, and all of that had spoken through Linda Marcus and my grandfather himself. They'd brought folders. We brought truth. The house hadn't changed. Not the creak in the front step. Not the way the morning light filtered through the lace curtains Grandpa never let anyone replace. Not even the dent in the banister from when I was 12 and slipped racing Theo up the stairs. But when I walked in that day after the court's recess, after that recording echoed through the courtroom, I felt it differently. Like it was exhaling. Like the walls had been holding their breath, waiting for someone who still remembered how to listen. And I did. Every step I took inside that home carried decades of memory, each more powerful than any line of legal text Gloria and her brothers had tried to conjure. They had shown up with entitlement. I had shown up with history. We returned to the courtroom that afternoon to present our final evidence. A letter Grandpa had written in his final weeks, folded inside the leather-bound copy of The Old Man and the Sea he used to read aloud to me every summer. It wasn't part of the will. It wasn't a legal document, but it was real. Meredith held it up in her gloved hand. Your Honor, this is Exhibit 17, a handwritten letter addressed to Missy Eliza Montgomery. It was discovered in the decedent's personal effects stored in a locked drawer in his study. The judge took the letter, examined it, and began reading silently. Then she asked, may the contents be read aloud into record? Meredith nodded. I braced myself. The judge cleared her throat and began, My dearest Eliza, I'm not sure if this letter will reach you before or after I'm gone. But if you're reading this, then know this home is yours. Not because of blood, not because of a name, but because you gave it a soul again. You reminded me what love without condition feels like. And when the world tried to define family by paperwork and lineage, you showed me it's made of loyalty, of time, of quiet companionship. I've left what I can to make sure this place never becomes just a house. It was always yours, even when you didn't know it. Love you more than the ocean loves the shore. Grandpa, no one in the courtroom moved. I looked over and caught Theo blinking fast. His jaw clenched. Gloria refused to meet my gaze. And Benjamin. He sat there, stiff lips drawn in a tight line, the letter cracking the armor he had so carefully worn. After the session, I didn't go home right away. I drove back to the house. I walked barefoot through the backyard where Grandpa taught me how to plant tomatoes. I sat on the back steps, ran my fingers along the faded initials we carved in the railing. E.M. plus G.M. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like coming home to something that had always been mine, just buried under silence and secrets. The court hadn't reached a final verdict yet, but it didn't matter, because no matter what the ruling said, the truth had already been declared. Out loud, on record, in front of witnesses. They'd tried to hide the will, but they couldn't hide the legacy. They couldn't hide the house that remembered my name. The courtroom sat in a hush that only legal uncertainty could conjure. Not the silence of respect, nor of grief. This was a silence sharp with calculation, the kind of quiet where people mentally draw battle lines in marble hallways. I sat there in my navy dress, hands folded, knees close together, trying not to let my foot bounce the way it did when I was nervous. To my left was Meredith, ever still, her lips in a fine line as she scribbled notes I couldn't read. To my right, no one. I didn't have family in this fight. Not in the way the others did. Only memories. Across from me, Gloria's chair was empty. She hadn't shown up that morning. Rumor had it she was meeting with a private mediator trying to salvage a deal. Or maybe she was hiding from the weight of a truth she could no longer bend. Benjamin was there, though his face unreadable. I watched him as he turned a silver pen over in his fingers again and again, like a man weighing the cost of what he didn't want to admit. Theo, seated beside him, looked thinner than I remembered. Gaunt, tired, like the years had finally caught up. He caught my glance once, and for a second his lips parted like he might speak. But then he looked away. The judge hadn't yet announced when she'd make her ruling. The letter, the recording, the photos. It was all admitted as evidence. The timeline was in place. The legal cracks had widened, and everyone in that room knew the foundation Gloria built her argument on was crumbling. But courts don't deal in emotion. They deal in precedents and paper. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's what makes them dangerous. That afternoon, I walked the perimeter of the estate. The autumn wind was picking up, brushing the branches like a whisper. I paused beneath the old elm tree, the one Grandpa always said was planted the day I was born. I remember the moment I saw you, he once told me, swaddled in blue, squealing like a cat. I said, well, she's got lungs, and if she's got heart to match, she'll do just fine. I rested my hand on the trunk and closed my eyes. I wasn't just fighting for property. I was fighting for proof that I'd mattered, that I hadn't imagined the love he gave me, that I hadn't mistaken shared meals and gentle words and piano lessons for something transactional, that what we had was real. Back in the city, Meredith called me to review the next steps. Her tone was clipped, but not cold, more like a surgeon explaining that they'd removed the worst of the tumor, but recovery still lay ahead. We've requested that the court freeze the estate assets until the ruling, she said. I expect a decision within the week. But Eliza, I waited. Be prepared for them to appeal if we win. I nodded. They won't give up the house easily. No, she said softer now. They won't. But this time, you're not alone. The next day, I received a package at my apartment. No return address. Just a small brown envelope with my name handwritten in familiar cursive. Inside, a photograph. It was an old picture. Me, maybe 6 years old, on Grandpa's lap. He was smiling wide mid-laugh, and I had my arms thrown around his neck, grinning like I'd just won the world. In the bottom corner, a tiny note had been scribbled. Home is wherever you're loved back. G. There was no signature. But I didn't need one, because I remembered the day he said it. It was the same day Gloria had accused me of stealing the last piece of pie at Thanksgiving. She made a scene, said I was always selfish, always taking without asking. I had cried in the hallway. Grandpa had found me on the stairs, handed me a napkin with 2 fresh slices, and whispered those words. The silence before the verdict wasn't really silent. It was loud with unspoken fears, rising questions, and the haunting echo of a man who made his choice with his heart, not just his signature. The family called it betrayal. I called it truth. And as I stood once more before the courthouse steps, coat-buttoned letter, clutched photo tucked into my wallet, I realized something. Whether I won or lost on paper, I had already reclaimed something they couldn't reach. Legacy isn't what you inherit. It's what you carry forward. The courtroom was colder than usual that morning, both in temperature and in tone. Sunlight filtered weakly through the tall windows, casting pale rays across the benches. The air was thick not with tension, but with inevitability. I sat straighter than usual, my fingers clutching the edge of my coat as I waited. Meredith leaned in slightly, her voice barely a breath. "She's coming in with the ruling." I nodded, heart tapping against my ribs like a quiet metronome. I didn't look at Gloria or Benjamin or Theo. I didn't need to. The performance was over. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Reyes stepped in her black robe, swishing softly, her eyes unreadable but focused. She didn't waste time. "This court has reviewed the evidence presented in the matter of the contested estate of Gerald Matheson." Her voice was steady, firm, and final. As she spoke, her words landed like weights, each syllable a blow, each clause a shift in the foundation of our fractured family. While the will submitted by the respondents was legally formatted and notarized, the court finds sufficient cause to question its authenticity. Meredith didn't move, but I saw her hand curl slightly. The audio recording submitted by the petitioner, dated 3 months prior to the contested will, has been forensically verified. The speaker has been identified as Gerald Matheson in a sound mental state, clearly articulating his intent to name Eliza Monroe as the sole inheritor of the primary estate. A murmur rippled through the room. Further photo documentation and corroborated testimony established the close and ongoing relationship between Mr. Matheson and Mrs. Monroe. "My name." She said my name. Based on these findings, the court hereby invalidates the submitted will in favor of the prior legally recognized testament, as expressed in the recording and supported by supplementary evidence. I stopped breathing. The estate, including the property located at 2416 Whitmore Lane, shall transfer to Eliza Monroe. Motion to freeze estate assets is lifted. Ruling effective immediately. The gavel struck once, and just like that, the war was over. Gloria stood slowly, her face red but controlled, like someone trying to smile through cracked porcelain. Benjamin looked stunned, caught somewhere between disbelief and wounded pride. And Theo? Theo looked tired, just tired. As people stood and filed out, Meredith touched my arm gently. "Let's get you out of here." I moved like I was dreaming. Out of the courtroom, down the long, echoing hallway, past the mosaic tile that used to make me feel small. I wasn't small anymore. Not in this story. Not in his story. Outside, the world was moving again. Cars passed. A child cried in the distance. Birds circled above the courthouse like witnesses to something unspoken. I stood on the steps, blinking at the winter sun, and slowly pulled the photograph from my coat pocket, the one of me and Grandpa beneath the elm. I whispered aloud, "We did it." And for a moment, it felt like he was standing next to me again, chuckling softly, his hands in those worn coat pockets, proud. The next day, I visited the house. I hadn't been back inside since the reading. The locks had already been changed, the sign removed from the lawn. It looked like a place caught between two realities, the life it had before and the future waiting to unfold. I walked through each room slowly, my fingertips brushing over banisters, bookshelves, kitchen counters worn smooth with time. In the study, I found the old chess set still out, king and queen in mid-battle. I smiled. It wasn't just a house. It was a map of my childhood, of the quiet conversations that shaped me, of Sunday mornings spent making pancakes, and Tuesday nights watching documentaries Grandpa loved, but I always pretended to understand. And now it was mine. Not through trickery, not through spite, but because someone saw me and made sure the world knew it. A few weeks later, I received a letter. From Theo. It wasn't long. "Eliza, I didn't fight harder because deep down I knew he chose you. I wanted the house because I thought it was the last piece of him I could hold. But you were the piece he trusted most. I'm sorry I didn't say that sooner. T." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the top drawer of the study desk next to Grandpa's old fountain pen and a small velvet box of cufflinks I hadn't yet opened. Some things take time. In the end, the house wasn't just an inheritance. It was a declaration. That love, real love, leaves a trail louder than any document. That legacy isn't always loud, it's often whispered. And that truth once recorded doesn't need to shout. It simply waits for the moment it's finally heard. The brass keys felt heavier than they should have. Cold against my palm, their ridges pressed tiny reminders into my skin as I stood at the edge of the front steps. For weeks, I'd held on to the official documents, the court ruling, the signed transfer papers. I had full legal right to the property. Now Gerald Matheson's home, my grandfather's sanctuary. But this moment standing before the door felt more like a memory than a victory. The porch creaked beneath my boots. The same three boards that always gave slightly under pressure. I used to leap over them as a child, imagining they were booby traps in some secret spy mission. Now they only groaned a welcome. I lifted the key, paused, took a breath, and turned the lock. The house greeted me like an old friend. Faint smells of cedar and old books still lingered in the corners. Everything was still intact. The grand piano in the music room untouched. The fireplace framed with the same stone mantel my grandfather carved himself when he was newly married. And the photographs. So many photographs lining the hallway, unchanged by time or betrayal. As I walked deeper into the house, a different kind of silence greeted me. Not empty, not cold, but expectant. Like the house had been holding its breath, like it was waiting for me. I wandered into the kitchen, brushing my hand across the marble island where I used to sit with a bowl of cereal while Grandpa read the paper. There, beside the sink, sat a folded linen cloth. I reached for it instinctively. And underneath, a note, written in the same looping cursive I'd memorized from birthday cards and recipe annotations. For Eliza. If you are reading this, then the house has found its way to the right person. You always saw what others didn't in people, in photographs, in stories. This house is full of them. Let them breathe again. Love, Grandpa. I didn't cry right away. I read it once, then again. Then pressed it against my heart like a shield. And then I broke. Not because of grief, but because I felt seen completely, deeply, and without question. I spent the next few days cataloging the contents of the house. There were things I'd forgotten, existed, antique cameras, war medals, scrapbooks of handwritten notes, letters to his late wife. I never knew he wrote. Every drawer revealed a layer of the man beyond the title of Grandpa, but there was one room I hadn't entered yet, the attic. He used to say, "That's where the ghosts live," and we'd laugh. But now it didn't feel like a joke. It felt like a challenge. I climbed the narrow stairs, the old wooden steps creaking louder than I remembered. Dust swirled in the sliver of light that crept through the small attic window. Stacked boxes lined the walls labeled in faded marker. Photos, 1960s. Clara's letters. Blueprints, final revision. And then I saw it. A wooden trunk, carved with initials. E.M. Mine. I sank to my knees and opened it slowly. Inside, wrapped in soft cloth, were dozens of Prince photographs I had sent him over the years. My first gallery show, street portraits from Italy. A series I did in a refugee camp that no one in the family ever acknowledged. He had kept them all, framed them, dated them, even wrote small notes on the backs in pencil. Eliza sees light where others only see shadow. This one, the boy with the violin, it sings without sound. Proud doesn't cover it. I sat there for hours, not alone. That night, I slept in the master bedroom, not because I needed to claim it, but because it was time someone returned to it with peace. I opened the windows to let in the night air and the sound of crickets. The moonlight spilled across the floor like an invitation. And for the first time in years, I slept deeply, not as someone holding on, but someone beginning again. In the morning, I stood on the porch with a cup of coffee in my hands and thought about what came next. The house wasn't just an inheritance. It was a responsibility, a place that had held love and pain and history in equal measure. And now, it was a blank canvas. I didn't renovate the house. I restored it, painstakingly, room by room. I repainted with the original colors, replaced worn carpets with reclaimed wood, turned the old study into a reading room where neighborhood kids could come on Saturdays. The attic became an art space for aspiring young photographers funded by a grant I established in Grandpa's name. And in the hallway between the dining room and the staircase, I hung a new photo. Black and white, softly lit, A candid shot of Gerald Matheson smiling mid-laugh, his hand outstretched to the lens as if reaching for the viewer. Underneath a small plaque, "The man who built more than a house." That evening, as I closed the front door and turned the lock from the inside, the keys no longer felt heavy. They felt right. The front gate creaked open before I could reach it. Standing on the other side was Lydia. Pressed blouse, polished heels, the same tight, superior smile she wore at the will reading. Only now there was something brittle underneath. "Eliza," she said, voice thin. "We need to talk." I didn't move, just held her gaze. "About what?" She stepped closer, lowering her voice as if afraid the air itself might betray her. "About the house." I nodded. "The one I now legally own." A flicker of discomfort passed across her face. "Don't be petty." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "You don't get to redefine things just because they're inconvenient, Lydia." She walked past me like she still believed this was hers. Her heels clicked on the porch, echoing memories of family barbecues and Sunday brunches where she reigned like royalty. She turned back chin high. "I grew up here too." "You did," I agreed. "But you didn't see it. Not like I did. You saw square footage. I saw history." Her lips pressed together. "Grandpa was confused in the end. You know that." I held up a folder, the court-approved transcription, the medical records, the time-stamped audio file. "He wasn't confused, Lydia. He was clear. You just weren't listening." She looked past me into the house. "Do you think this makes you better than us? That now you're the favorite because you played the orphan card." My jaw tightened. "I didn't play anything. I was grieving. You were scheming." Silence crackled between us like an unspoken storm. Lydia reached into her designer purse and pulled out a check. Blank. Signed. "I'm willing to buy it. Whatever the market value is, plus 20%. Walk away clean. No hard feelings." I stared at the paper like it was written in a foreign language. "You think this was about the house?" I asked. She blinked. "What else would it be about?" I stepped forward. "This was about a man who raised me when my parents couldn't. Who taught me how to ride a bike, how to find the North Star, how to stand back up when the world knocked me down. This wasn't just wood and brick to him. And it isn't to me either." I paused. "This house is his story. And now it's mine." She folded the check back into her purse. Her voice sharpened. "You're going to regret this." I tilted my head. "Funny. That's what Grandpa said about trusting you." She turned without another word and stormed down the steps. The gate slammed behind her like punctuation. I stood still for a long while after she left. Not because I was shaken, but because I wasn't. That weekend I held a community dinner on the lawn, just like Grandpa used to do. Neighbors brought pies and folding chairs. Kids played tag through the garden. I gave a speech short, sincere. "This house always had its doors open," I said. "Let's keep it that way." And in that moment I saw something Lydia never could. The real value, not in the market price, not in the court papers, but in the people who laughed beneath the old oak tree, in the stories being passed hand to hand like dinner rolls, in the little girl who sat on the porch steps and whispered, "I want a house like this when I grow up." Later that night, I walked into the study and opened a drawer Grandpa used to keep locked. Inside an envelope addressed to me, it held a single photograph, me and him on the porch. He's mid-laugh. I'm holding a toy camera. On the back, his handwriting. "You don't just inherit a house, Eliza. You inherit what it stood for. Don't ever forget that." I haven't, and I never will. 2 weeks after Lydia stormed off my porch with that blank check, I received a thick manila envelope in the mail. No return address, but I recognized the legal stationery even before I opened it. My stomach turned before I even broke the seal. Inside were court documents. A formal motion challenging the will. The petition claimed my grandfather had been medically unfit to alter his estate when he made the recording and changed the designation of ownership. It was signed not only by Lydia, but by my two other cousins, Marcus and Elaine, who hadn't said a word to me since the funeral. They were trying to reverse everything. And they had hired one of the most expensive estate litigation attorneys in the state to do it. I sat at the old kitchen table surrounded by the quiet creaks and warmth of the house I now legally owned, rereading every line. The language was cold, clinical, stripped of sentiment. The respondent Mims. Eliza Montgomery cannot reasonably claim sole entitlement to the decedent's property based on a recording made without proper legal supervision. The familial relationship between the petitioner and the deceased is long-standing and central to the decedent's legacy. They were rewriting the story. Again, only this time on paper. I called my lawyer Gloria, a sharp, calm woman who'd handled my grandfather's estate paperwork from the start. "They're banking on emotion," she said over the speakerphone. "They want to wear you down, Eliza. Make this feel like a burden instead of a truth." "They're painting me like some manipulative outsider," I said quietly, as if I wasn't part of his life. As if this house wasn't mine in every real way before it was ever written into law. Gloria paused. Then she said, "Let's remind them of the facts." We prepared our case carefully. My lawyer gathered medical records from Grandpa's last 6 months, physician notes, psychological assessments, even letters from his friends affirming his mental clarity and routine. We found 2 witnesses, his longtime neighbor and his doctor, who could testify that he'd spoken openly about wanting me to inherit the house. Not because he loved the others less, but because I had cared for him when no one else did. And most importantly, we submitted the original recording, now professionally authenticated and transcribed as irrefutable evidence. When the hearing day arrived, I wore a charcoal dress and carried nothing but a small notebook in my hand. The courthouse was sterile and echoing. Lydia sat across the aisle from me in a crisp white blouse, her expression neutral but smug. Marcus and Elaine whispered behind her, occasionally glancing in my direction, like I was some stranger who'd crashed their family reunion. The judge, an older woman with kind but tired eyes, opened the session with a sigh. "Let's keep this civil, please," she said. "I don't want a drama. I want facts." Their attorney went first. He painted a picture of a confused old man, of a manipulative granddaughter who swooped in at the last moment. He leaned heavily on the absence of a written will, on the non-traditional nature of a voice recording. Then he played his trump card, an old photo of all 4 cousins, including me, sitting on the front steps of the house as kids. "Surely," he said with a performative chuckle, "we don't believe Mr. Montgomery loved only one of these children." It was a cheap emotional tactic, but it worked on the gallery. Several heads turned toward me, questioning. Then it was our turn. Gloria stood up calmly and began. She didn't try to out-emotion them. She brought receipts, dates, doctor's notes, expert testimony, a notarized letter from Grandpa's doctor declaring he was of sound mind, witnesses who confirmed he'd openly expressed his intent, and finally the recording. We played it in full. My grandfather's voice filled the courtroom. Clear, firm, loving. "Eliza is the one I trust with the house. She's the one who's been here. Not because she wanted something, because she never asked for anything. She deserves this. I'm saying this while I'm clear, while I'm strong, so no one can twist my words after I'm gone." A hush fell over the room. Even Lydia looked away. I looked at the judge as she flipped through her notes, face unreadable. Then she turned to me directly. "Miss Montgomery," she said, "do you have anything you wish to say before I make a decision?" I stood slowly. My palms were dry, my voice steady. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "I just want to say this isn't about money. It's not about revenge. It's about honoring the last clear wish of a man who never asked for much in his life, except that his voice be heard." I paused, and that voice is what brought us all here. The judge nodded once, and in that moment I knew I had won, not because the court had ruled, but because my grandfather's truth had been spoken in his own words for all to hear, and there was no legal challenge that could silence that now. 3 days after the judge ruled in my favor, I came home to find Lydia's SUV parked in the gravel drive. It was mid-morning, and the air still held the chill of early spring. My house sat peacefully under the pale sun, its white shutters casting gentle shadows across the porch. But the moment I saw that car, my stomach turned. I knew this wasn't over. I parked quietly and walked up the path. The front door was open. Inside I heard voices, boxes being moved, footsteps on wood. I stepped into the foyer and froze. Lydia stood in the living room, arms crossed, giving orders to 2 young men in moving uniforms. Beside her, Marcus leaned against the fireplace mantel like he owned the place, casually sipping from a reusable coffee cup. Elaine was nowhere to be seen, but I spotted her designer handbag tossed across the old armchair. My grandfather used to nap in like this was her weekend escape, not the scene of a legal loss. "What are you doing here?" I asked. Lydia turned. "Oh, Eliza," she said with a syrupy calm. "Don't be dramatic. We're just gathering a few family pieces." Her eyes flicked toward the stairs. "Grandpa always said the guest bedroom set would be mine. I figured now's the time." I took one step in. "You lost in court," I said. "This house and everything in it is mine now. You know that?" Marcus gave a small shrug. "Technically, yeah, but that doesn't mean we don't deserve some of what's here. We grew up in this house too." I looked around. They had opened the curio cabinet. A few antique photo frames were missing from the shelves. On the table were several boxes, some already half filled with heirlooms trinkets, even Grandpa's collection of letters and notebooks. They weren't taking keepsakes. They were stripping him. "I'm calling the police," I said, pulling out my phone. Lydia held up her hand. "No need for that. We're leaving in 5 minutes." "You shouldn't have been here in the first place." "It's not like we're stealing," Marcus said. "We're family." That word family rang bitter in my ears. They used it as a weapon, as a get-out-of-jail card, as a shield for their entitlement. But not today. I walked to the porch, sat on the steps, and made the call. When the officers arrived, I stayed calm. I showed them the court ruling. Gloria had emailed me a certified digital copy, and I pulled it up on my phone. Lydia tried to spin. It called it a misunderstanding, said they were just collecting sentimental items. The officer raised his eyebrows when he saw the back seat of the SUV filled with silver trays, crystal glasses, even one of Grandpa's handmade wooden clocks. "This doesn't look sentimental," he muttered. "I didn't press charges. Not yet. But I told them in front of the officers that if they ever set foot on the property again, without my written consent, I would." They left. Lydia looked at me like I'd stabbed her. But it wasn't cruelty. It was boundary. For the first time in years, I wasn't the soft-spoken cousin standing in the corner. I was the woman who now held the keys, not just to the house, but to the story of our family. And I was done letting them rewrite it. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table just like Grandpa used to. The old radio played low jazz. I lit a candle, poured a small glass of wine, and opened one of the boxes. They hadn't touched the one filled with letters Grandpa had written, but never sent. One caught my eye. It was addressed to me. The handwriting was a little shaky, but unmistakable. "Eliza, if you're reading this, it means I did what I should have done a long time ago. I hope you're in this house now, not because you fought for it, but because you were meant to be here. You were always the one who saw things, not just with your eyes, but with your heart. That's why I chose you, not because of blood, because of love." "Grandpa." I pressed the letter to my chest and let the silence embrace me. 3 weeks after I stood on the porch and watched Lydia's SUV pull away for the last time, the house finally began to feel like mine. Not just in legal terms, but in breath, in rhythm, in soul. The first real thing I did was remove the guest registry. It had been a relic from my grandparents' anniversary party, a dusty leather-bound book where family members signed their names on holidays, special dinners, and reunions. Lydia had always insisted on keeping it front and center on the entry table, like proof we all belonged. But I knew better now. Belonging wasn't about a signature in a book. It was about showing up when it mattered and staying when it got hard. I moved through each room like I was meeting it for the first time. The study still smelled like pipe tobacco and oak. The light in the upstairs hallway always flickered at 7 p.m. sharp. The leftmost window in the attic whined when you tried to shut it. I wasn't just inheriting a home. I was inheriting a life. Memories didn't live in photo frames or monogrammed napkins. They lived in the creases in the dents of the old wood banister in the spot on the wall where Grandpa accidentally spilled ink and never painted over it. Because mistakes have stories, too. For the first time, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. One morning, I found something I hadn't noticed before. Behind the armoire in the master bedroom, wedged deep into the wall, a folded page in Grandpa's handwriting tucked into a hollow knot in the wood. I gently pulled it free. "If you ever feel like this house doesn't want you, look again." Open a window. Touch the banister. Sit in my chair. This house doesn't keep secrets. It keeps promises. I made a decision that day. Not just to live here, but to restore the soul of the place. The family had tried to strip it bare of memory, of history, of meaning. They thought they could remove the man by taking the things. But I still had his words. And I still had my voice. I called Gloria and asked if she could help me set up a small foundation in Grandpa's name, a literacy and home skills program for local teens. I wanted to turn the house into more than a personal sanctuary. I wanted it to serve. It's what he would have done, I told her. He always said a home doesn't end with its walls. She was quiet for a moment on the phone. Then, that might be the most powerful way to win Eliza. Not just taking back what's yours, but turning it into something they can't touch. A few days later, I received a letter. Typed. Formal. Legal. From Lydia. She was appealing the court ruling. I read the first few lines, then folded the paper and set it aside. That night, I brewed a pot of tea and pulled out the old camcorder Grandpa used to carry around. I hadn't touched it since the day I played the recording in court. But I knew it was time to revisit it fully. Not for defense, but for remembrance. The tape clicked softly. The screen blinked to life, and his voice filled the room. Eliza, you've always asked the questions no one else dared to ask. You see things, you notice, and that's rare. That's important. One day, this house will be yours. Not because I want to hurt anyone, but because I trust you to carry its story. I cried. Not because I missed him, though I did, but because for the first time I knew why he had chosen me. And for once I agreed. When I walked the hallways that night, the air felt warmer. The house no longer felt like a battleground. It felt like belonging. Not granted. Not stolen. Earned. The day the final court letter arrived, it was raining. Not the dramatic, stormy kind you'd expect for a finale. Just a quiet, steady drizzle that felt like the house was exhaling with me. I stood in the foyer, the same one where I once felt like an intruder, and opened the envelope with hands that no longer trembled. The appeal had been denied. Final ruling. The property, its contents, and its intellectual rights, including my grandfather's recorded words, were legally irrevocably mine. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt released. Later that afternoon, I went to the study and opened a drawer Grandpa had locked during the last years of his life. I'd avoided it until now, unsure if I was ready. But something told me the moment had come. Inside was a sealed envelope with my name in his handwriting. To Eliza, if they ever make you question your place. I unfolded the single-page letter. You weren't born to be quiet. You weren't meant to be small. You've inherited more than a house. You've inherited the right to speak when others silence. This family's story always belonged to the loudest voice in the room. It's time it belonged to the truest one. I placed the letter beside the old camcorder. His voice and his pen both now mine to carry forward. That weekend, I hosted an open house, but not for sale. For healing. I invited local artists, neighbors, teens from the community center. I gave a tour of the rooms, told stories of what each crack in the wall meant, where each chair came from. I didn't mention Lydia or the lawsuit. Not once. Because this wasn't about them anymore. It was about what you build after they try to break you. A few days later, Lydia emailed me. Short. Blunt. Enjoy your victory. But you'll always be the outsider. I stared at the screen for a while, then hit delete. No reply. She was right about one thing: I was the outsider. But not in the way she meant. I was outside the cycle of silence. Outside the manipulation. Outside the inheritance they thought only bloodlines could determine. And I was finally okay with that. One evening, I stood in the doorway of the room they all once fought over, the grand library with floor-to-ceiling windows. I watched the sunset spill amber light across the shelves, and I thought about what legacy really meant. It's not what you're given. It's what you refuse to give up. I took the camcorder one last time and recorded a message of my own. My name is Eliza Whitmore. They tried to erase me. They hid the will. They forged a new version of truth. But they forgot one thing. The truth has a voice. And now it's mine. If you're still listening, maybe your story doesn't end with revenge. Maybe it ends with restoration. Maybe it begins when you finally say out loud, I was meant to be here. If your family tried to rewrite your place in the story, What would you do? Subscribe for more stories where silence becomes power and truth finds its voice.